Between the years 2015 and 2016, thrash metal's Big Four put out new records in the same 2-year window. Slayer, Megadeth, Metallica, and right in the middle of it, Anthrax drops an album that does something none of their records had done since 1993. It cracks the Billboard top 10. This is Anthrax For All Kings, the record where Jon Donais proved he wasn't just filling a chair, where a Walk in the Rain past the Tower of London turned into one of the heaviest songs Anthrax has ever written, and where a band that could have coasted on nostalgia instead delivered their most commercially successful album in over 2 decades. And yes, before you ask, this is also the last episode of the series for a while. Stick around because I'll tell you exactly what's coming next and when I'll be back to close this chapter out properly. To understand For All Kings, you have to go back to the afterglow of Worship Music, that 2011 album that was a surprise smash, critically and commercially, and it completely changed the energy inside the Anthrax camp. Scott Ian has talked about walking into these writing sessions with a real sense of positivity, and you can hear that confidence baked into the DNA of this record. Writing actually started as early as 2012 and 2013, squeezed in between tour dates. A lot of real foundational work happened somewhere unglamorous but productive, a jam room at Scott Ian's house in LA. That's where the engine of his band did its thing, and that engine has a very specific division of labor. Charlie Benante churns out riff after riff. The guy's a machine, and Frank Bello takes those ideas and shapes them into actual songs, building melodies specifically to give to Joey Belladonna. And Scott Ian brings the lyrical intensity and figures out how to weave it into what Charlie and Frank had built. Recordings stretched from fall 2014 through 2015, and was generally decentralized. They tracked across 5 different studios, from Sherman Oaks to Hollywood to Burbank to New York to LA again. Jay Rustin came back to produce, the same guy behind Worship Music, and helped them chase this bigger, more expansive version of the classic Anthrax thrash sound. But the headline of this era is Jon Donais. It's his first full studio album as the guitarist, stepping into a role vacated by Rob Caggiano, a transition I covered in the last episode. Donais brought this fresh, technical, blistering quality to the guitar work, and it shows immediately on the 7-minute opener, You Gotta Believe, which mixes genuine progressive ambition with the thrash backbone this band is built on. Frank Bello has called this record their most ambitious work, and honestly, track for track, it's hard to argue. Now let's talk about the cover, because it's one of the most striking pieces of art in Anthrax's catalog, and it came from a genuine collaboration between 2 heavyweights, Charlie Benante and legendary comic artist Alex Ross. The idea started with Benante, who's basically been the band's visual architect over the years. He pictured this massive cathedral-like hall with 5 towering stone statues, the 5 members of Anthrax rendered as kings. And it wasn't a standalone idea. Benante wanted to tie this cover directly into the visual image of We've Come For You All and Worship Music, connecting 3 album covers into one continuous story. He described wanting to show these huge king statues with the creatures from the last cover pulled into the room through the Anthrax A. Once Ross came on board, he used his signature gouache painting style to make the whole thing feel enormous, and he didn't just execute Benante's vision, he pushed back on it. Benante originally imagined the statues lined up in a rigid, straight formation. Ross convinced him to shift the deeper layered perspective instead, which makes the statues feel like they're actually bearing weight and actually monumental. He added a glowing stained glass window in the background, featuring the Anthrax pentagram, and down below the kings, a crowd of shadowy figures reaching up in worship. It's dense, it's gothic, it's got its own mythology. The band has even floated the idea that its artwork could be the seed of an actual comic book, with these statues as the originators of some lost musical sound. Now, personally, I always thought it was kind of weird because you have Charlie and Scott like all the way up in the front, and then right behind them is Joey and Frank like in the background, and all the way at the back is like the new guitarist, and you can barely see who he is. But I thought that was kind of weird, but it kind of shows what the hierarchy of the band is. But anyway, moving on to a really good song.
The evil twin, I just can't understand a person with the ability to do what these people do.
Musically, Evil Twin is Anthrax doing what they do best. Full-on, chaotic, old-school thrash, but lyrically, one of the angriest, most politically direct songs on the record. Song is about extremism, people who take other lives in the name of religion or ideology and convince themselves they're righteous for doing it. Scott Ian coined the phrase evil twin to describe that mindset, people who appoint themselves as judge, jury, and executioner over everyone else, and the chorus doesn't pull punches. It flat out rejection of the idea that these killers are martyrs. The real trigger for the song was a string of headlines back in January 2015. Scott Ian was overseas on a spoken word tour when a major act of violence overseas made international news, and it hit him hard. He also folded in his frustration with a broader pattern he'd been seeing for years, senseless, high-profile tragedies here at home, all of it filed under the same category of humanity's worst impulses. And Charlie Benante matched that fury musically. He said the main riff came out of a genuinely thrashy headspace. They just come off touring with Death Angel, two bands that put anyone back in the old school aggressive mode, and you can hear it.
I was just so nervous to be able to even do justice to this arrangement of music we had created. And
this is the centerpiece of the album for a lot of fans, and for good reason. 8 minutes long and thematically massive. The idea that every great civilization on Earth was built on top of immense human loss. Scott Ian's angle here is almost historical essayist. His point is simple and blunt. London, Rome, Paris, New York, LA, every one of these cities is standing because of what it cost to build them. That's the whole thesis of the song. The title comes from an ancient Norse legend involving a brutal method of execution, one of history's more infamous acts of ritual violence, used here as a symbol for what progress actually costs. The band leans on that imagery without getting overly literal in the lyrics themselves, using it as more of a historical reference point than a step-by-step description. And there's a great origin story here. Scott Ian was in London working on a record, struggling to find lyrics that matched this massive instrumental. He was walking past the Tower of London in the pouring rain, thinking about centuries of dark history tied to that building, and it just clicked. How much history is actually buried underneath the city. He went back to his hotel room and the lyrics poured out. The video matches the intensity of the song. Director Jack Bennett built a dark cinematic narrative starring James Duval from Donnie Darko, centered on a masked tyrant king ruling through fear, ending with a model kingdom transforming into a modern-day skyline. Not subtle, not meant to be. This one goes back to a well Scott Ian has drawn from before, Stephen King's The Dark Tower. The song is built around Roland Deschain, the gunslinger protagonist, and the title itself is a metaphor for his gunfighting. Ian actually touched the same fictional universe once before, decades earlier on Lone Justice from 1985, spreading the disease. So it's a sequel of sorts 30 years later. What's interesting is that Charlie Benante was nervous about this one. He wrote the instrumental as a mid-tempo, riff-driven piece, and he genuinely worried that the band would reject it for not being fast or aggressive enough, especially sitting next to something like Evil Twin. The influence is pure classic rock, specifically Led Zeppelin, leaning on melody and evolution rather than speed. Instead of rejecting it, Frank Bello leaned all the way in and built a massive vocal melody around it, and Joey Belladonna delivers one of his most stadium-sized performances on the whole album because of it. For All Kings landed about as well as the band could have hoped. Critics praised it as a genuine standout. Outlets like The Guardian pointed specifically to the strong choruses and the crowd-pleasing aggression of the faster tracks, saying they successfully recaptured that classic speed metal energy. A lot of reviews frame the record as this perfect midpoint between the raw thrash of Among the Living and the heavier, more progressive melodicism of Sound of White Noise. There was a criticism, it was pretty minor, a few tracks leaning too hard into radio-friendly hard rock territory, occasionally feeling formulaic. Fans were largely thrilled. This record dropped in the same stretch as Slayer's Repentless and Megadeth's Dystopia, so there was this whole narrative forming around the Big Four proving they still had it. Belladonna's vocals and Donais' guitar work got singled out constantly. One pocket of pushback came from the John Bush loyalists, fans who preferred that grittier, more progressive 90s era, who weren't as sold on the full return to traditional thrash. Commercially, the album was Anthrax's biggest moment in a long time. It sold 34,000 copies in its first week, beating out Worship Music. It debuted at number 9 on the Billboard 200, their first top 10 album since Sound of White Noise in 1993. It topped the Hard Rock Albums chart, hit number 2 on both the Top Rock and Independent albums, and charted in 18 countries total. And they didn't sit on that momentum. They toured this record hard for the better part of 2 years. Right out the gate in early 2016, Anthrax landed the support slot for Iron Maiden on the Latin American leg of the Book of Souls World Tour, playing massive stadiums across Mexico, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Chile, and Argentina. Even with tight 45-minute festival sets, they made room for Evil Twin and Breathing Lightning right alongside the obligatory classics. That rolled into a full summer of European festivals, then a fall 2016 North American run alongside Slayer and Death Angel. Then 2017 brought a European headline tour built around the 30th anniversary of Among the Living, playing the album front to back while still pushing the new material hard. That February, Anthrax became the first of the Big Four to play the 70,000 Tons of Metal Cruise Festival, debuting Blood Eagle Wings live for the first time. Then came the Killthrax tours, co-headlining run with Killswitch Engage that was successful enough to warrant 2 full legs across 2017 and 2018, and they closed out this entire touring cycle the way you'd want to as part of a stacked lineup of the first legs of Slayer's farewell tour in 2018. And that's that for All Kings, Jon Donais' debut, the band's biggest chart moment in decades. This is where I am pausing the Anthrax series for now. I want to pick it back up properly when the new album comes out in September. So I'll be continuing that with my review of the new album, and I'll probably do a tier list of all the albums, including SOD and the Red Lamb and all that other stuff. I want to do a big tier list. So that's going to be coming later in September. But in the meantime, probably starting early August, I'm going to be doing Flotsam and Jetsam, and I'll be covering that up until the new album. I might not finish until or when the new album drops, because it drops on the 28th of August, and I think I have like 14 or 15 albums. So that's going to be hard to do, but I'm doing that next. Like, subscribe, check out the playlist. All the episodes are in the playlist, which should be appearing on your screen right now. And thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.